Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of SUGTalks. I'm Craig Dale, your host, and together with our special guests, we'll take a deep dive into the topics, challenges, and opportunities facing SAP users today. Please make sure you subscribe so you never miss another episode. I'm delighted today to be joined by Timo Elliott, Vice President and Global Innovation Evangelist at SAP, and Chris Hodgetts, Head of Technology Innovation at the Sanctuary. Welcome, gentlemen. In today's episode, we're going to be taking a closer look at data and analytics, as well as some of the key themes that came out of our recent Analytics Symposium. But just before we start, I just thought I'd ask you a quick question before we get into the subject of analytics and thinking on how much we rely on our smartphones and devices and the amount of personal data perhaps that we have on them. So my question to you is, if you had to delete all but 3 apps from your smartphone, which ones would you keep and why? So while you think about that, I'll start, as I've been trying to ponder this and I'm really struggling. I think I'd keep WhatsApp because I have a lot of family chats on there. I think I would also keep my kind of music and Audible. I think, because on my morning walks, as I'm tracking them, I'm always listening to a book, and the podcast app, of course, so I can listen to these, and also my morning news podcast on my walk. So I think mine would be podcasts, WhatsApp, and Audible. So, Timo, what are your 3?
Well, first, let me dodge the question because, of course, the phone is just a window onto the web these days. So what you delete or don't delete on your phone doesn't make that much difference. You can access it all through a browser if you want. The big number one app that I use is my phone. I take thousands of pictures. I'm a keen photographer. And if anybody wants to go to Instagram, Timo Elliott, you'll see dozens and dozens of pictures of the Eiffel Tower. So that'll be number one for me. And then Spotify. I listen to a lot of music whenever I'm out and about.
Cool. And Chris?
Yeah, great question. And I'm really similar to Timo. Really, my camera is kind of my key one. I take lots of photos of family and things around, so it's really important for me. And going with that Instagram, so I share some of those photos with people. Not all of them. A lot of them stay with my device, my cloud storage. And I think the other one as well is my banking. I can't get around without my banking app. It's critical to me. I don't ever go into a bank anymore. I do it all virtually, and I do it all off my phone. So please don't steal my phone.
Just make sure it's got a very strong password on it.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, guys. It was an interesting question, and one that I had to think about quite a lot. But okay, back to our topic in hand, and both of you presented at our recent Analytics Symposium, and I hope you agree that there were many valuable discussions about the importance of data to organisations throughout the day. And to start things off, I was just wondering if you'd like to share your main takeaways from the conversations perhaps you had and for the sessions that you listened to at the symposium. So, Chris, start with you if I may.
Yeah, sure. So I think if I look at kind of how you presented in the first place, Craig, your conversation around sort of the skills elements, you brought out a number of elements we brought in the report you did, but skills really stood out for me. It's a big topic I find at the moment. And I find it goes further than I think came out in the conference. So it came out around skills within companies. I think this is skills within partners, skills within kind of the whole network. I think it's really important as we get into kind of more and more kind of modern analytics, that digital innovation. We need kind of our partners, our extended capacity and capability to be ahead of the organizations, to actually be able to drive us, to be able to enable us to move forward. So I thought that was a really important point, but I think it goes further than just kind of skills within companies. Timo, kind of digital silos stood out for me when you were talking. Obviously with my role, it's a really important thing anyway, but it's something I've observed both within Sanctuary and other organisations. I think, there's so much drive around people have this consumer access these days to the greatest technology. You can get these brilliant things coming to you, but then when you get into your business apps and things like that, people start to struggle. It's a little bit of a drag. It's not that much fun. It's not a great interaction. It's not that kind of consumer experience that people expect. And I think that was really important to me. When you start talking about digital silos, we almost drive people into them sometimes by if you're using classic SAP, for example, you're going back to what was it, 1992, with the different color schemes. If you haven't adopted all the new bits and pieces, you drive people to find different ways. They'll download it and stick it in Excel because they'll find it easier. So I think that was a really important bit that came out to me. And the business, I think business technologist, did you call it business developer? That role, I think we're seeing that more and more. I think that's really important. And things like citizen development, that whole bridging the gap, it's coming out more and more. It's fascinating and really exciting. And again, the Howdens as well. I loved the Howdens talk. I thought that was brilliant. I loved the when they were talking about machine learning. I completely agree with what Rob was saying around we've got to find ways to inspire the ownership and engage the support. Because without that, we don't get the adoption, and it just doesn't become sustainable, and everything falls over. I think I mentioned it on the day. Great thanks to Nick for giving away the worst kept secret in the world that everybody that works in technology uses Google. It's become the user manual to the digital experience.
Oh, thank you. Timo?
The biggest one for me is just what a delight to go to a face-to-face conference and actually talk to people and have conversations. So, I've done a lot of conferences in the last year, 2 years, but most of them have been online. So it's just so much nicer to be able to chat to people. Like Chris and I had some questions to him about sponsorship, for example. We know it's really important for projects, but can you grow your own sponsors, for example, was one topic of discussion. And then obviously for me, I care a lot about getting feedback on our products. So that also was really valuable from Chris and others. One of the things I thought was interesting is that we still have all of the old problems of analytics, data silos, for example, but we've now got more diversity because we have new problems or new opportunities around data science. So Howdens was a good example of both in many ways because they put together this data science project. But at the same time, they said that they were a fairly traditional business where people didn't really jump at the chance of analytics. So it was interesting that they used the very latest types of technology, data science, with somebody working on a data science project to really create interest and demand for analytics that we've had for a long time. And the final point I'd say is so the big BI blurring is now part of this business technology platform idea that Gartner and Forrester and McKinsey, everybody else think is this notion of a foundation for more flexible organizations in the future, and analytics is clearly a big, important part of that platform.
Thank you. And just on that point, obviously, analytics and data is, becoming more and more prevalent, and organizations' needs have increased. As you were saying, Chris, some of the results of our survey, and 76% of our members said their BI and data analytics needs has increased in the last year. And I suppose data, we talk about the data explosion year on year, Timo. And what do you think are the key drivers of the growth of the requirement around BI and data analytics?
So I think there's a few. One is just continued uncertainty. For a while there, it looked like that things were getting a little bit back to a new normal, but now there's lots of new uncertainties, inflation and war in Europe and sanctions and so many other things going on. And of course, if you're driving a little bit in the dark, you want the headlights on so that you can at least avoid the obstacles before you crash into them. So that's one reason. The next is the data silos. We've already mentioned that, but over the last few years of the pandemic, people did a lot of innovation because they had to in order to survive. But that has led to islands of innovation and more data silos than there were even 2 years ago, along with new data sources, sensors, 5G, and so on. So we're now starting to see the pendulum swinging back, if you like, where it's gone from individual projects to do cool stuff around the organization to going back to, hold on, we need a more strategic approach to innovation and transformation overall. So we need to bring all of this data back so that we get a full view. And of course, the ultimate expression of that is the new business models, where data stops being only for internal decision making and starts being part of the products and services that are being offered to your customers. And so you're charging for analytics in a new way, and that changes the dynamic.
Thank you. And from your perspective, Chris, what do you see? What's driving the need inside Sanctuary?
So the pandemic's been a massive driver for us. I think it's leapfrogged organizations kind of around the UK and globally. If you look at kind of the digital footprint of so many companies, look at the NHS, for example, they've probably leapt forward, by multiple years in their approach to things. I think we've had that need within Sanctuary as well. We were doing some great stuff pre-pandemic. We'd invested in things like SAC ahead of the pandemic, and we're using that quite heavily. But we saw people wanting a lot more access to consumable data. I think that became kind of, with everybody being remote, you couldn't turn around to the person next to you and say, can you just explain the spreadsheet to me? Or can you tell me about this? Or, you lost the human connection, and you can jump on a Teams call or a Zoom call or however you interacted with people. But it's not the same as having kind of that network around you, that support bubble of kind of sharing information. So I think that was one of the things that came out of it all. And I think, again, it's that consumer experience. You're sat at your desk at home, whether that be kind of your kitchen table or an office or kind of on your knee or wherever it was that people kind of found themselves to rest. And, you've, on the one hand, you've got kind of your mobile phone or a tablet or something like that. And, you might be on kind of Facebook or WhatsApp, or not saying I did this, but, you've got your consumer kind of apps there with you at the same time you're in the business space. So you've got access to all this immediate, really consumable information that's sat there. And I'm just laughing at Timo because he's waving a phone around now. I didn't really, I'm going to pretend I am that boring. But it just changed the way that kind of we sat side by side, and there became this balance between the two. A balance between, we've always talked around consumer kind of devices and consumer apps and things like that, but we really got pushed into that one space where they're all there. And Timo, you were saying kind of around people kind of almost coming back to that enterprise scaling of all these things now, and I think that balance is kind of critical. We're seeing it within Sanctuary. We drove really, really heavily across the analytics space because that's what we needed to do. But now we're going back and saying, well, what about kind of our governance? What about our management? Kind of do we know the quality of everything that's there? How are we actually looking after that? And it's that balance of scales that you get within innovation. You drive forward on one side, and you kind of lose the balance in the other side a little bit, and you have to rebalance the scales. Otherwise, you create bottlenecks within your organization. I don't know if you see that within other organizations, Timo.
Absolutely. I thought it was a fascinating point you just made about the need, because we are all stuck in, we can't have the conversations, that we need to do it more formally. I think that's a really interesting insight, in particular, that we need to formalize things and ultimately do them better, because we can't just chat with people. Just longer term, there's been this notion of moving from gut feel, where somebody had done the job for decades. Howden's talked about having some of these people in their organizations where they just knew what was going on because they'd lived it for a long time. And obviously, over time, that needs to be replaced by something a little more rigorous and a little more efficient.
Interesting. And just also now going back to what you're talking about earlier around digital silos, One of the points that came out as well is quite the majority of members facing challenges because their data is spread across their environment on multiple platforms. We've been talking about mobile devices, computers, whatever. There's so many different things now. So how can organizations overcome that challenge, Timo?
So first, I don't think we ever will, because the day we do, there'll be a new data source coming online, right? There's been seen the rise of social media over the last couple of decades. Now it's intelligent edge sensors, and I think 5G has a lot of really interesting B2B uses. So there's always going to be new uses of data, but I do think we've made big progress in integrating it faster, and thanks to the cloud. So the ability to do everything faster and more flexibly, thanks to these cloud environments, I think is a big opportunity. What stops us is not so much the data silos themselves, but as ever, it's the data quality problems. And this came up in many of the case studies that we saw at the Analytics Symposium. Howden's, for example, they did a nice data science project around trying to predict when there would be stoppages or why there were stoppages. When they looked into the stoppages, there were things like tea breaks. So not really a stoppage, right? You had to take it out of the data set. Or they had stoppages even when the data showed that there was no production going on. So something strange there. And I have to say, my favorite slide of the entire event was the results of their data science project that showed, I think the fifth factor in stoppages was marked on the chart. It said number of cats. And I assume this was short for categories, but I just had this great vision of these cats wandering through the manufacturing warehouse and stopping the kitchen cabinets from being made. So, and I think the final thing I'd say is how do we get rid of these data silos or the challenges? I think we do have this opportunity to let business people do more themselves. So Gartner calls them data technologists, for citizen developers, business technologists or citizen developers. So just generally the tools are getting easier. Again, I think the cloud is a big part of that. And so the IT shouldn't have to be as much of a bottleneck in bringing these data sources together and making them usable.
Thank you. And Chris, on your session at the conference, you talked about Sanctuary Group's diverse landscape and your kind of data unification challenges. And could you give us some insights into those challenges and the role SAP plays in your organization?
Yeah, definitely. And I think kind of, we started seeing those challenges a few years ago where we started looking at kind of all of our disparate data sources. So we have data in SAP, we have data in Microsoft, we have data in multiple line of business applications. And you try and bring those all together. And it becomes a really complex challenge. We run kind of BW7. And we looked at doing this within BW7, and we had kind of some really lengthy conversations and debates about kind of whether or not we should try and do it within there. And we kind of came out of it going, this just isn't going to be fun. It's going to be painful. It's not the right tool. It's not the right thing to do. BW7 is fantastic at what BW7 does. It just wasn't right for this challenge. So we got into a conversation with SAP around how do we do this, and it was a pandemic-driven conversation. So we looked at, we were looking at creating a bespoke HANA database. And how do we quickly create this unification platform? And SAP kind of, fantastic support we had. Said, well, what about data warehouse cloud? I'll be honest with you, I'd looked at Data Warehouse Cloud probably sort of 6 or 7, maybe 8 months beforehand and gone, it's a new product. I don't think it's the right thing for us at the moment. But the speed of development that's happened on that product and the investment SAP's put in there, it just meant that in that short space of time, we went back and looked at it and got walked through by kind of, so many different people from SAP. It was fantastic. And we actually went, this is a really good tool for doing it. This is a great concept behind it. And it's not just the technology, it's the concept behind the technology that you really need to look at, because it's a different way of working when you start to bring all these disparate data sources together. That traditional warehousing kind of, persisting all that data in a very particular way, it's quite long-winded, it's quite hard to do. But when you actually look at it as a unification of data from its source, it becomes really interesting, and your challenges become different. So it becomes easier to splice the data together. It's not simple, but it becomes easier. But your challenges then actually become your underlying systems, not actually kind of your warehouse itself. So, so virtualization of data, major principle within Data Warehouse Cloud. Absolutely fantastic idea. Falls on its backside half the time. Not because of the technology that SAP have put out there, because it's absolutely brilliant running on the HANA appliance. It's really fast, it's really usable, it's really scalable. If you look at some of your line of business systems, they're not built for doing that. They're not actually ready to actually virtualize the data outwards. So you get this different challenge that kind of, you've got a brilliant kind of unification layer that's really accessible, that's really usable. You can actually push out kind of the data to people, your citizen developers, your business technologists kind of absolutely love it. It's actually kind of those line of business systems that need to catch up. And we get the same problems when we've gone to kind of BW7 with it, and it's actually kind of, it's the age of the technology and the way the technology was built at the time, and you actually have to persist the data and actually work in a slightly more legacy way than you would like to, because of kind of the underlying systems. So it's a really interesting challenge, moving from kind of that classic kind of approach into a modern approach and having those classic systems around the outside.
And of course, Chris, we don't call BW painful. We call it uniquely powerful, rewarding, and valuable.
Yeah, Timo, don't get me wrong, I love it. It's an absolutely fantastic tool for what it does, and the later incarnations, because we are kind of talking about Sanctuary being on BW7, and that's not on HANA, so it's not a BW4, it's none of those things. So we haven't adopted kind of the more modern on that one. So it's a bit of self-inflicted pain on that one.
And Chris, I might be jumping ahead, but what I liked, one thing that I was struck by in your presentation was the snowboard analogy. Use envy to get interest. Maybe you could explain that to people.
Oh, the snowball envy. So yeah, so one of the things you have to do is you have to get kind of support for your adoption, really. You have to get those people that are going to advocate for you. They're going to be your allies. They're going to kind of shine a light on using the new technologies, because getting adoption into new technologies, that's ridiculously hard, isn't it? Everybody always goes, I like the shiny thing, but I know what I'm doing with this thing over here. So they stay with what they know. So you've got to find your advocate. And once you've found your advocate and you find kind of a common business outcome, a common personal outcome, you find a reason that they want to join you on this journey. They want to be innovative. They want to drive things forward. And you kind of, together, you push the snowball to the top of the hill. And you get to the top of the hill, and then you start going to people, look what we've done. Look at this. This is great. And you kind of just push it over the edge. And that snowball starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it turns into an avalanche. And I know we were talking and saying, avalanche, that's an interesting kind of way of looking at it. But it's the force and the momentum. It doesn't stop. Once it starts going, it just has a life of its own, and you can't stop it until it decides to stop itself. So finding that person, finding your advocate, and actually getting them to help create that little bit of envy, so you can actually sort of push it over the top and actually get that momentum, is just critical. And we've seen that with DWC, we've seen that with SAC, we've seen that with kind of so many different things we've done. And it's finding that use case that people's peers can buy into, whether they be kind of a technical executive, operational field force, whatever it is. As soon as you can find your advocates, you're going to win the change battle.
Just on that point as well, because obviously adoption is obviously a key challenge once the new technology or new systems go in place. And just going back to what you were talking about earlier in getting that sponsorship for the project and for everything itself. And I think it was Timo, you mentioned grow your own, and almost envisaging a greenhouse with executives in saying, I'll sponsor you. Any tips on getting that sponsorship and the process to go through to really aid?
Okay, I'll start. So on the one hand, there's no silver bullet, right? I've seen lots of teams be very successful in lots of different ways, because each organization is different, and you should take that into account. To really understand your organization, I guess, would be the first step. And then I think one that was illustrated beautifully on the symposium day was the Big Bus Tours presentation. Never let a good crisis go to waste, because they're a group, they run the tour buses that in 21 cities around the world. But suddenly in March 2020, it went down to 0. So they were able to use that time to completely rethink their business systems. So the core systems, they went to business by design, but then they introduced really quite quickly on top SAP Analytics for all of their financial planning cycles and analytics. So they were ready and raring to go when they reopened in August last year. So I think there's only one city, he said, Hong Kong is still closed. So a great example of, it was obviously a really tough time for the business with the pandemic, and they had to furlough a lot of staff, but they were able to use that to really rethink how they were doing their analytics strategy.
Yeah, I've got to agree with you, Timo. There's no silver bullet, is there? Everyone thinks there's this magical equation for, growing your own kind of sponsors, and actually it's a lot of hard work. There's a huge amount of floor walking. There's a huge amount of personal investment. You have to get out there and do the hard graft. It's not going to come to you. Occasionally, you're really lucky, and somebody does come and go, I really want this. I'm really going to be behind it. But a lot of the time, especially when you're talking about the new technologies, you've got to be out there. You've got to be having those conversations yourself. You've got to be sort of having kind of those kind of, what do you want to get out of it? What's your personal aspiration for this? What's the business outcome we're going to meet? And you've got to personally be kind of comfortable with being uncomfortable, because you're always putting yourself personally at risk. You're always trading on your reputation. You're always out there saying, look, I'm behind this. I'm selling this to you. And you almost become kind of a pre-sales internally. Pre-sales externally is fantastic, and I love pre-sales resources, but they will sell you the moon on a stick. And I love it. I love kind of all of the things that you can do, but then you've got to bring it into an organization and go, right, realistically, right, there's the moon on a stick. This is what you can do with it at the moment, though. This is where we can get to, but this is what you can do with it, and this is the journey I'll take you on, and this is what I'll invest in with you. So you have to kind of say, I'll walk with you on this journey. Otherwise, kind of you're just creating something that's going to cliff edge, and you lose your personal credibility, and immediately kind of you lose all that sponsorship. You can't go into the next thing and saying, right, this is what I want to do now, let's look at this, you've got this business outcome, I can help you with this. Because I go, yeah, but the last one, I kind of saw you'd left somebody high and dry on that. I can't trust you. And it's a huge amount of trust that people put in you when you start pushing kind of the new technologies.
I'd echo that one on trust and credibility as incredibly important, especially around knowing enough about the business to have credible conversations, right? You're not expected to run the business, but have read the annual report and have seen what's highlighted, and you have ideas about how technology could help those key goals. I think is really important, and understanding who you're talking to, and like, what can you do to help that person make more money or get a better role in the future? How do you get them promoted? I think is a great place to start the conversation.
Yeah, and that partnership, Timo, as well, isn't it? It's kind of changing it from kind of they're the customer and I'm doing to them, and actually we're doing it together. We're in this. This is kind of if you fail on this, I fail on this. We're in the boat together. It's either going to sink or we're going to get to shore. So let's enjoy it together.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And just moving back as well to an earlier comment around data explosion, if you like, and the amount of data is one of the challenges that was brought up within the survey. Again, was the challenge of too much data and not knowing where to start. And where do you think, Timo, that most value can be gained in terms of BI in starting with that data?
It's a great question. Again, there's so many different approaches, but one is, I'd say, ultimately you have to know what you're working on, which is you're working on the culture. Your big goal is to change the information culture of the organization. So whatever your easiest target is, to get some people in the organization using data and thinking about data in a different way. So obviously you can get value from providing data to some key power users. But one thing, again, came up in the symposium is with I think was it Howden's again, that they provided some information to everybody. Or was it? No, it was you, Chris, sorry, at Sanctuary. You worked on providing, the first thing you did wasn't try to provide, everything, just bring all the data together, but just let people access the data that was already there. And it sounded like that was a key part to building this culture of, there's data I can have access to, or maybe there's other data I could or should have had access to.
Yeah, so that one was actually, we were using SAP Analytics Cloud, and what we needed to make sure was data was consumable. So we were collecting kind of we had all this data, we were collecting it together, but people couldn't really access it or understand it. So we kind of had this great puddle of data, but it didn't have any value in it. And I think that's kind of the real driver for me is, what's your critical outcome that you can attack? What's the key bit of value that you can achieve, and you can achieve quickly? We can all grow. We can all sort of, look at these great mountains and go, this is what we want to go and build. But, by the time you've actually got there, everything's changed. So, you need to take these small steps. You need to do it iteratively, and you need to give value at every point. So you need to do that value assessment. It's not just a financial assessment. It's an experience assessment. It's an adoption assessment. It's kind of, what does it mean to the person that's actually got it in their hands? Can they take an action on it? Can they do something with it? With Sanctuary, it's often, can we improve somebody's life with it? What value can we give back to our communities with it? So every single bit of information that you're looking at has to have a purpose. It has to have a value. And I think often we kind of go, we've got too much data. I don't believe that. I love the amount of data we have. I believe we should only collect the data if it's got value. I think sometimes we collect data because we think we might need it. And I think kind of every organization does this. We all do it personally as well. It's that kind of, it's almost that fear of missing out. If I haven't got it, I'm not going to be able to use it. Well, actually, you can often go back and collect these things later, and you don't want to get into a swamp of data. You actually want to keep the valuable elements and keep value assessing it as well. We're seeing kind of data that we've got that we've had to collect, for operational purposes over time, that had a lower value to us suddenly shoot up the scale because of things like sustainability. So when you're doing carbon calculations, data that had a low value in the past suddenly has a really high value to an organization. It was always valuable. It was just that level of value that was in there.
And just on that point, as we're coming towards the end of our discussion now, and obviously the role of data seems to be evolving ever rapidly. And I think just to leave our listeners, if I may, and ask you, what are your data or analytics top tips you would like to share with them to perhaps help them overcome their challenges and move into the future with a bright data future, if you like? Timo.
I have so many. I actually literally have half a book in my archives that I've never gotten around to finishing. One day that will come out, maybe probably when I'm retired and the points aren't useful anymore because it's all being done by AI bots or something. But So I thought Howden's was a nice example of using data science projects, because everybody knows AI is cool and machine learning is cool, and you can get to talk to executives about cool stuff like that when they wouldn't talk to you about data quality or something. So talk to them about AI, get people excited about the opportunities, and then go in and do all of the boring stuff, like fix your data platforms and fix your data qualities. I'd say that, again, culture, I think, is a very important thing. Make sure it's part of your plans. I found a quote this morning, actually. On reconnaît un homme habile à ses réponses, mais on reconnaît un homme sage à ses questions. We can tell if somebody's clever by listening to their answers. We can tell if somebody is wise by listening to their questions. So ultimately, your goal is to help people ask better questions. So everything you do should have that in the back of the mind. And then ultimately, I'd say one of the things that my really biggest top tip, I think, is stick with it, because it's hard. Chris just made it sound really easy a few minutes ago. He said, oh, you just do this, this, and this. But the reality is it's about doing, yes, the right things, but doing it like day after day and working at it and going through the inevitable challenges and sticking with it anyway. Because again, if you're working in analytics, given that data is the number one thing that determines the future of today's organizations, you are the most important people in your organization. So you're strategic, it's important. Try and overcome those daily challenges and keep smiling.
Thank you, Timo. I like that keep smiling element. Be happy. Chris?
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to reading Timo's book. Can you not wait until you retire? I could do with it now. I could do with those top tips. I think for me, and it's definitely not easy. I think we often underestimate adoption. I think we look at kind of adoption as being kind of an end user element, and we kind of go, right, if we can get people using it, it's great. But what we've seen is a great change in technology. We're constantly seeing these changes in technology. As technologists, we're in continual change programs, but we don't often look at the adoption that kind of within the technical teams as well. We kind of go, right, you're going to deliver this amazing new software, you're going to deliver this kind of technical change, and you can just do that, can't you? And we're leapfrogging around, we're changing kind of the theories of the way that we deliver these things, the theories behind it, the concepts, the principles. So we need to give people across the board kind of time to learn, to absorb, to kind of inspire others with it. They've got to be part of this change cycle themselves. They've got to adopt it themselves, because if they can't use the technology behind the scenes, the people who are consuming it at the end are just going to have a really painful experience, and it's not going to work particularly well. So I think my tip is just think about everybody involved, not just about the people you're providing the service to.
Thank you both very much. Timo, final words.
Just final words. So as Chris mentioned, like you looked at Data Warehouse Cloud, it's like, no. But then it's changing really quickly because we're using the power of the cloud to be able to innovate fast. So if you haven't looked at these tools recently, go and look again. SAP Analytics Cloud, Data Warehouse Cloud, SAP Data Intelligence we haven't talked about, but it's a really cool tool. All of those are available for free as the SAP BTP platform free tier. So you can go right now, Google it, sign up, and start playing with these tools, even for productive uses, for free.
Excellent. And I think what we'll do as well is we'll get that address off you and we'll put it in the notes that go along with the pod so that people can access it. Thank you both very, very much for your time, for your insights, and also for being at the event last week. Really, really do appreciate it. And to our listeners, I hope you enjoyed the conversation and found it valuable. So, be sure to subscribe. And until the next time, stay safe, stay well, and keep washing your hands.